Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Things That I've Made, Art Talk, things I'm thinking about as I'm making things. This is a giant painting that I am making. It's 5 feet wide, 9 feet tall. I'm calling it Portrait of a Friend of Jeremy Ruth. This is made mostly with acrylic. It's acrylic marker, acrylic paint, charcoal, graphite, Sharpie. It's made in collaboration with Ashley J. Williams, a multidisciplinary artist in Washington, D.C. She did the fallopian tube on the top. This is a representation of an old lover, an old partner of mine, a friend of Jeremy Ruth. It's not actually him, right? It's just a bunch of markings made on canvas. So it is just canvas that's been gessoed and paints applied to it is all that it is. It's just a representation. I made this so I could help myself heal. I was walking through my studio one day working on stuff and I was like, I need a giant picture of this person's head. And I was like, I could do that because I'm an artist and it would help me think through things. I've had a kind of a traumatic life. My father was an opioid addict when I was growing up and it was kind of violent, as addiction is. And I've had some sexual abuse in my past. Kind of forced to leave home young in order to stay safe. And so I've been homeless a few times because I haven't had family support in my life. And in 2020, when I met this person, I was homeless. I was living on a floor without hot running water and without a refrigerator. And I wanted to date, so I went on a date with this person. And the second date we ever had, I actually brought them to where I was. And they slept on the couch cushions, and I slept on the floor next to them, I remember. And it was nice because I was having all these scary situations that were happening because I was homeless in a pandemic. And then this person was not only inviting me into their space and letting me sleep in a bed, but also sleeping with me on the floor and like participating in this like danger that I had. And it made me feel really seen and it made me feel safer. A few months after I met them, I got an apartment. It was really small. And a few months after that, I got COVID and I couldn't go back into my apartment because the people living there didn't have COVID, but I did. And so again, I ended up on the floor. And he came to visit me to see if I need anything. And he didn't have COVID, he has to stay away. But he saw me and I was so pathetic. I was so sick. I had like a real high fever and I was on the floor, just sick and he told me he loved me. And it was, like it healed me. I just know it healed me. He told me he loved me and he got me an Airbnb and I got to sleep in a bed and take baths. And I'm sure he saved my life. It was so kind. And about a few months after that, we were dating, it was going well, and we went on a trip. We went to upstate, and in upstate, we were volunteering at a farm, and I was out in a field in a hot day, and I collapsed because I have an autoimmune disease, and sometimes I get sick real fast. And so I collapsed in the field, and no one was around to see me, and so I was just kind of left there. And so when they found me, I was severely dehydrated and almost dead, and they had to rush me to the hospital, and I had to, my veins were bursting as they were trying to rehydrate me, and it was really, really scary, and it really hurt my body and my mind. And 1 month after that, my lover was moving, so I spent the day helping him move, and we went to celebrate on the roof, and then flames burst out of his apartment, and he lost everything. I thought he had died at one point. It was another traumatic situation. He lived with me for a month after that. And at this point, I was no longer functioning very well. I had been homeless, I had almost died a few times. I was starting to experience real hard symptoms of PTSD. Those are symptoms like hyper-awareness. I started to be hyper-aware and hyper-vigilant. I started to think people were out to get me who weren't. And then things like avoidance. Anything that I thought might trigger me or anything that I thought might be dangerous, I wanted to avoid. And because I had been in danger from just sleeping in my bed and someone crawling in to attack me, I was afraid of a lot of things. I was afraid of the house burning down. I started to avoid. I started to have a lot of symptoms. And it affected our relationship. And so a few months after this, we almost broke up. We had a really big fight. I remember he asked me to stay, and I wasn't sure if I should. I think about that a lot now. Things were not going to get a lot better anytime soon, at least not for me. I was so hyper-aware and hyper-vigilant and avoidant, and I was having all these symptoms, so it was really hard for me to function normally in life, and I knew I needed help. So I was in therapy, and the therapist said I should see a psychiatrist to maybe give me some medicine. So I saw a psychiatrist. He prescribed me 3 pills at once, which I took, and then 3 days later, I had something like a seizure. I fell down. I was not able to talk or walk. And I ended up 5 days in the hospital with wires coming out of a cap they put on my head. Again, it was really, really scary. Again, it was just another traumatic thing that happened. And yeah, I got out of the hospital and I was trying to like just sort through everything, and things got even worse because I started to have rapid weight loss. As you can tell, him and I eventually broke up, right? The 2 months before we broke up, I lost 17 pounds. And 3 months before we broke up, I got 2 concussions. It looked like I was dying. I was just losing a bunch of weight. And at this point, a church in the place where I grew up in the Midwest started to publicly talk about my childhood sexual abuse, which madly triggered the PTSD as well. And so I started waking up in the night just screaming, like not able to sleep through the night. I was thinking people were trying to attack me. I would wake up screaming. I was losing weight. I was falling down. Obviously, it was really hard to have fun with me. My lover would want me to go out like with him and his friends, and if I needed to rest, or if I was afraid and I would want to rest, he would say, listen. And so then I would push myself to go out, but then if I went out, I was afraid, like hypersexuality like scared me. Or drunk people were scared of everything. So I would like pick fights, or I would fight, flight, freeze. I would run away from the situation, or I would like try to pick a fight, or I would act like someone who has severe trauma would in these situations. And my lover did not like that. As most people do not like it. It's not fun. And we didn't know what was going on. And I was like sometimes I was like laying in his bed and I was like trying to write like my will because I thought like my disease was coming and I was going to die. Pain, and I was afraid of even my body. Like I knew that sometimes I was standing up feeling like I was going to be fine. And the next thing I knew, I would be on the ground with like a black eye and I wouldn't even know how I'd gotten there. I would pick fights with, I just wasn't myself. I just couldn't figure out what was going on. Things had been awful between us. So we had a meeting where we decided we'd just stay together for like 2 more months and really work on things. And then he went on vacation. He speaks French as his first language, and his family owns a house in Spain. So he took a bunch of his French-speaking friends to have like a vacation. And while he was gone, like I had keys to his house, and like my friends were staying in his spare room, and like I felt like we were still together. It was in the middle of a lot for me. So we talked 2 times on the phone. One time I just cried the whole time. And then the next time we broke up. I remember him yelling, I break up with you, like, repeatedly. I remember me yelling at him. I remember falling down and being in like a pile of my own snot and tears. I remember calling other people and like yelling. I remember yelling at people in the building I was in. I was just like inconsolable. I remember calling a bunch of people. I remember trying to go out and like buy beer, like drink my fears away. I remember like all these things in kind of patches because I ended up in the hospital about 8 hours later and my phone was wiped. Like I deleted his number, I deleted all of our texts, I deleted everything. And I had a high fever. And they told me that I was ectopically pregnant and I was bleeding from it because an ectopic pregnancy is when you get pregnant in your fallopian tube, so it's a non-viable pregnancy. They pushed through my fallopian tube and then I almost died because that can kill you. It felt like the worst hangover of my life. It felt like I like just drank too much and then like woke up in the hospital. But what had happened was that I had gotten pregnant and then it had slowly just messed around with my hormones and my balance and made me lose weight and like all this stuff. And it was just like I thought my disease was progressing. But it wasn't. It was actually a pregnancy. And then I was like, I couldn't tell my lover because we had just broken up, and I like deleted his number and yelled, and it was really bad, and I was bleeding a lot, and I really couldn't get a hold of very many people, and oh my God, it was awful. So when my lover got back, I went to his house, and he was kind to me. He's not a bad person. I remember we took a walk. I'd just been in the hospital for 5 days, and we took a very long walk in the summer, and I can't remember all of it. Like I remember crying by trees, and I remember passing out a bunch, like on a hot sidewalk, and I remember at one point I started throwing up, and he had to like pick me up and like carry me and put me in a bathtub and like throw water on me. It was really awful times. Like these were terrible times. I'd have these procedures to get the rest of the stuff out, and so he gave me his credit card for those procedures, and then I asked him if he would see me after them because I was scared. And so he agreed, and the very last time I saw him, I was staying at a friend's house because I needed help because I could hardly walk. And he came to visit me. It was summertime. He was so tan and beautiful. And he sat and he told me about the festivals he had gone to and drugs he had taken and trips he had taken and that brunch he had just gone on. And at the time, I was like 98 pounds, and I was wearing a diaper. and I just could hardly walk because they'd like cut into me. And I remember I like sat on his lap and I put my head in his chest and I just cried, and I was like trying to understand things because we'd been so close, and it just felt like, to me, like so sudden. He didn't want me touching him, and he got up and he walked away from me, and he told me he did not love me anymore. And I was telling him I needed help understanding. Like, he complained about my behavior. I told him, like, hey, you're right, like that wasn't good behavior. When I was doing that, I was pregnant and like going through all these things, and it was like ripping through me, and I didn't know any of that. Like, does that make any difference? And he just said, Charlie, you always have some excuse. To him, it wasn't that these things were affecting me, it was just looking for excuses to have this bad behavior. And so when he said he didn't believe me, I believed him, because that interpretation of me is not a generous one. I just needed help to survive this situation. So they tried to do these procedures in me, but they messed one up, and I couldn't figure out that they had just messed it up because I was on a lot of drugs and still hormonal imbalance, and I was in a lot of pain, and I was hyper. Like I was going to the hospital a lot. Like there was never anyone to take me, so I was getting more and more afraid over time. I was having a hard time explaining even what I needed because of all the drugs and all the pain and just everything how it was affecting my body. But I still had to have these multiple procedures because of the mistake they had made. And so I asked him to still help. He several times said at certain days he would give me something, and then he wouldn't. And so I'd reach out to like his mother and be like, hey, your son said he'd help me, I'm pregnant, like, can you remind him he said he'd do this? And then he would do it immediately. He hated that I was asking other people, and he told me that he thought that was manipulative and abusive. I live below the poverty line. I don't have a family. Like, he was telling me to use my family, but I don't have them. And if I had them, I would have used them, when I was homeless. So I get it. Like, if he said he'd help me and then he wouldn't at the time he said he would, and so I'd reach out to get help, and then he would say that that was manipulative because I should just wait for him. If I live paycheck to paycheck and I can't work, then, I'm not going to be able to eat. He said, I have a gig, I'm going to get $500 and I'll pay you this day. I'll pay you on Friday $500. And then Friday came and Friday went, and I didn't have $500. And so I reached out to his friend and I said, please remind him. And so she did, and then I got the money. He said, don't ever reach out to my friends again. So then a few weeks later, he said, hey, I'll give you this amount of money on a Friday. The Friday came, the Friday went. I didn't get the money. I didn't get the money on Monday. I didn't get the money on Tuesday. He wasn't responding to me when I would ask him when the money was coming. I wasn't able to get the medicines I needed. I wasn't able to eat. I was counting on that money for bills. So I went on Instagram, and under pictures, I wrote, hey, like, your ex is pregnant and dealing with a pregnancy, and you said you give him money, and they still don't have it. Can you please give him the money? And when I wrote that under a couple of pictures, he gave me the money, and he blocked me on Instagram, and he again told me that I was manipulative. And it was so hard for me because from my perspective, he was saying one thing and then not doing it. And from his perspective, I was manipulating him. And I was so messed up on drugs and hormones and pain and fear that I couldn't go slow. No, he never went to the doctor with me, and he never read any of the doctor's notes. And so when I would call him, he would sometimes be like, well, like, you're kind of exaggerating, or it can't be that bad. Or when I've talked to this friend, their pregnancy was like this, and it's not anything like yours. And I was like, well, where are you getting this information? Come to the doctor and they'll explain it to you. Like, I'm having a really hard time explaining it. But he was over with it, and that was it. And so I wanted to be done. But I had to go to the hospital again because I started bleeding, and I made an accounting mistake while I was there. I came out and I had like negative money because I hadn't moved the money. So I moved money and then I borrowed money, but I still only had like a couple dollars in my bank account. I needed $40. Like, I spent the day in the hospital because I was bleeding. I was gonna go and have another day of tests in the hospital, and I was gonna have this procedure. And so I needed materials at the end of the day of testing. And so I reached out to my ex-lover, and I just explained like kind of what happened and asked if I could have $40. Can you bank transfer me? It's because I know we used to do it. And he's like, yeah. And so then I went to the hospital, and while I was in the hospital, he's like, hey, send me some bank information. And I didn't get it because I was in the hospital doing tests all day. And so when I got out, I saw that and I was like, hey, please send it to me. And he was like, no, I can't now. Like, I'm on a bike ride. No, you don't understand. Like, I'm not going to get this procedure and I'm going to bleed more. Like, please just give me this $40. Or if you're on a bike ride, just bike and give me $40. No, please. And he texted back like that he had 5% battery on his phone, and that he wanted to bike ride. And he was telling me he thought I was exaggerating. He was telling me he didn't believe me. And so of course, like, if I call him and I was like, I really need this, and he didn't believe me, like, of course going on a bike ride is more important. I was so afraid of bleeding more I was so afraid. I reached out to Jeremy Roos to be like, hey, Jeremy, can you remind your friend? They said he'd give me $40, and I'm counting on it. And Jeremy said something like, hey, I'm not going to get in between you, which now I don't think is that bad, but I was frantic in that moment without friends or family, just bleeding. And I didn't hear it like that. I heard it like, hey, you're trying to like manipulate. You're trying to like get more than you should. And so I didn't get the money. And so I didn't get the procedure. And so I bled more. So I had to make this painting. I needed to just look this person in the face because it was really hard what they made me live through. And love is a generous interpretation of another person. And now that I'm in therapy with a lot more people with PTSD, I'm starting to see that like our behaviors can be interpreted as just like the worst behaviors. And we all act the same. Every person with PTSD that I've known has similar problems. That's why it's a disorder that can be classified. And it doesn't mean that anything I did is excusable. Like when I behave horribly when I'm having a traumatic event, it's still terrible and it still hurts other people. I'm just saying that I don't think anyone could live through all of the things that I lived through and then get pregnant. I made this painting so I could forgive this person because I was getting mad. I was thinking, I told them that I was disabled like on our third date. I was showing them, I wanted them to know that I did not have the means and I wasn't successful in some books. And I thought they were looking at me. I thought they were with me on the floor and with me in the hospital. But I realized like they were looking at me and I was telling them, hey, I'm disabled, hey, I'm sick. And they were saying, oh, but you're a hot redhead. And I thought, they didn't see me really. But then I realized I have to meet myself coming back. And like they were telling me, like the first time I told them I was disabled, they said, but I don't consider you disabled. Which is a really ableist thing to say. And so I wasn't looking at them clearly either. They were so beautiful that I wanted to have this generous interpretation of them. I think what happened here is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's when people with the least amount of information often overestimate how much they know about a certain topic. And when I think about it, he didn't know anything. Like he got to make decisions that impacted my health when he never went to the doctor. He never read any doctor's notes. Like he was making all of his decisions just based on the knowledge he had within himself, not with any supplementary knowledge from like a medical professional. And for me, it was a really big medical event. And for him, it could have just been a made-up thing because he never saw any evidence. It's because he didn't want to, but he didn't. And so I had to make this also just to ask like Jeremy and all of the friends, how would you want a low-income person without any family who gets pregnant on accident to behave? And what could I have done as myself? Like not what could I have done as this idea of me as a person with family and with means, but what could I have done as a person who's been homeless? Like what could I have said or done to get help when I was highly traumatized and super sick? I want to be whole. I don't want to be so broken. And I have to heal. And I've been so sick, and sometimes I am so sick. This has taken way longer than it should have, probably because I'm low income. But there have been times where I'm so sick that I wake up and I forget that we've broken up. And it's been months now. It's crazy. And I think that he's there, and he's going to say something nice and kind. And then I have to remember that actually we got pregnant, and it ruined a lot of things. And it was too much for me. My PTSD is so great now that I am not able to function very well. I'm afraid at any moment I will start to bleed or collapse. I'm afraid if anyone gets close to me, that if I get sick, they will leave me. I'm afraid of getting attacked on the streets because in the middle when all this was happening, I walked out on the street and some guy saw me and ran up to me and kind of tackled me, and I was so afraid when that happened. And I'm just afraid of everything. I like the hardness of this painting. I like the softness. I love this man. I think he did not intend to do me harm, and I think I did not intend to do him harm, but I think we both did each other a lot of harm. And I don't think our intentions are as important as the fact that a lot of harm was done.